Hi everyone, this is Rosie, and today we're going to be making a small project bag that's perfect for knitting, crocheting, or any of your handwork. And the best part is, it folds flat when it's not in use. So let's get started. Here is the bag that we'll be making in the video. It's approximately 9 inches wide by 8 inches high by 3 inches deep. And it has a little carry handle off to the side. Now it is made from wax canvas, and because it's made from wax canvas, I like to completely line the interior of the bag with cotton. And the reason why I want it lined is because wool and yarn tends to throw off a lot of fuzz, and wax canvas is a fuzz magnet. This is a smaller size bag meant for smaller projects. So in here I have a pair of finished socks, and then I have 2 skeins of sock yarn, and I have a few of my circular knitting needles in here. And there's still more room for some needed items. And the best part about this bag is that it folds flat when not in use. So let's go ahead and start making the bag. Let's talk about the materials that you need to make the project. First, you need 2 yards of cording. I'm using a nylon paracord. It's about 1/8 of an inch in diameter. Next, you need a piece of webbing that's 1 inch wide and 18 inches long. And this is seat belt webbing that I'm using here. For the lining, you need 2 pieces of fabric that are 13 inches wide by 12 inches high. I'm using 100% cotton quilting fabric for my lining, and it does not require any interfacing. For the exterior of the bag, I'm using waxed canvas. It's 13 inches wide by 31 inches high. I do have it folded in half here. I will be using an all-purpose sewing thread. This one is by Aurifil. You'll need a rotary cutter along with a rotary cutting ruler and mat, a pair of scissors. You need some marking tools. Now in the video you may see me using a friction pen. Be very careful if you're using one of these. I only use them for demonstration purposes because while the marks will disappear with heat, they can come back with cold. And I also have 2 chalk markers here, and this one here is my favorite one to use. It is a chalk wheel. Then you're going to need a seam ripper, and it's helpful to have a stiletto. You'll need some wonder clips, and if you do any hand sewing, you will need some hand sewing needles. We need to start by marking some lines on the wax canvas. Now mine is folded in half with the right side facing out. I want to make my lines on the wrong side of the canvas. And we're marking our lines on the short end. The first line will be marked 1/2 inch down from that top edge. So I'll just line up my ruler, and I'm going to mark it with my chalk wheel. The next line that we want to mark will be 1 inch down from that top edge, and I do like to always measure down from the same spot. And now I want to mark one more line down from the top edge. That's 2.5 inches down from that top. The chalk wheel that I'm using is made by Clover, and it is an older style chalk wheel. So if you would like to purchase one of these, it may look a little bit different from mine. Next, we want to make some marks in from the side edges. So on the 1 inch line, we want to make a mark that's 1 inch in from the side edge. Just like that. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side. So now you should have 2 marks coming in from each side that's on the 1 inch line, and the mark should be 1 inch in from the side edge. Now we're going to make some marks on the line that's 2.5 inches down from the top, and those marks will be 1.5 inches in from the edge, from each side edge. Now we want to connect this mark with this mark here, right where those marks intersect each line. So I'm just going to line my ruler up right at those intersections, and then I'll draw a line in between. And the line only needs to go within this section here, between the 1-inch line and the 2.5-inch line. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. Line up those intersections and draw my line. After you've finished all these markings, you're just going to turn the whole piece around and you're going to make the same exact markings on the opposite end. And I'm going to mark this end off camera. I just finished marking the opposite end, and I'm going to take the whole piece and flip it over. So now I actually have the right side facing up again because we did our markings on the wrong side. And I want to take this and I want to fold it back on this 2.5-inch line. So I'm just going to line up that 2.5-inch line and press a fold in it, or press a crease in it all the way across, just like this. And I can put a couple of clips in here just to hold it all together. Now we can go over to the sewing machine and do some stitching. So you're going to start at the side edge and you'll be stitching on top of this 1-inch line. So you'll stitch across the line here until you get to this point where the marking is. Then you're going to pivot and then you're going to stitch up the diagonal line. Then you'll do the same exact thing on the opposite side. You'll turn the whole piece over and you'll have this end also folded down on the 2.5-inch line, and then you're going to do the same stitching on both ends. I'm ready to start sewing. I will be using a stitch length of 2.6. I am going to back stitch at both ends, and I'm going to start just by sewing on that 1-inch line. And when I get to that intersecting point there, I'm going to pivot and sew up the diagonal. And backstitch. Then I'm going to slide over to the other end and do the same exact thing, and this time I'll be starting my stitching on the diagonal. And again I'll pivot and sew across on the 1-inch line. And then backstitch. Then I'll go ahead and start sewing the opposite end in exactly the same way. I just finished sewing the 2 short ends of the project bag, and now I want to make some cuts that are about 1/4 of an inch away from my stitching line. So I'm just going to take my scissors and make a cut right there. And then I'll make another cut along this diagonal side. And again, you want this to be about 1/4 of an inch away from the stitching line. Next, I want to make a cut that's going to go from this point right into that intersection where the stitching is, but you want to be careful not to cut through your stitching. So you're just making a little clip there. And then I like to cut in from each side to form a little bit of a V shape. And this is going to eliminate a lot of bulk in that corner there. Then you'll do the same exact thing on the other side. If it's not exactly 1/4 of an inch seam, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal, but you want to try and get it to be as close to 1/4 of an inch as you can. Then you're going to make the same exact cuts on the opposite end. When you're done making the cuts, we're going to turn this so that the wrong sides of the project bag are together. This is going to form your casing. And then I like to take a point turner, which I failed to talk about at the beginning of the video. And then I just get it up in here just to gently push out those edges. You want to be careful that you do not poke through your stitching. And you'll do the same exact thing on the opposite side. I also like to open up that side seam there and then fold it back in place. And then you're just going to make a nice crease right along that top edge there. And then you'll do the same exact thing to this side. I have my casings turned right side out on both ends of the project bag. Now I have the right side of the fabric facing up, but I want to fold this piece in half so that the right sides are together. So I'm simply going to open it up and fold it in half. I want to make sure that these top edges are even with each other. And I want to find the center bottom simply by folding it in half, just like this, and finger pressing a crease in place. And now that I know where the bottom center of the bag is, I want to mark a line 1.5 inches up from that bottom. So once again, I'll just use my chalk wheel to mark a line 1.5 inches up from the bottom. And then I'm going to flip it over, and I want to fold up on that line. So I'll just simply fold and finger press right on that line. I want to open up the exterior again so that the right side is facing up. And we want to fold the top edge down to form that casing. And we want the fold to be in line with these two seams right here. So you're simply going to fold it back. And then just finger press it in place. And then you'll do the same thing on the opposite side. Fold your casing back so that the fold of the casing is in line with those two side seams. And take your 1-inch webbing, and we want to cut a 45-degree angle on each end of that webbing. And I'm just eyeballing it. And I'll use my first cut as a little template to make the second cut. And then to prevent fraying, you can go ahead and singe those edges. Now take a marking tool, and we're going to draw a line right at the bottom edge of the casing where the fold is. And that line needs to be about 1 inch or 2 long. Just like that. And then you'll do the same exact thing on the other side, on the same side of the bag. So once again, I'm just drawing a line that's about 1 or 2 inches in from the edge. And those are going to be our placement lines for our webbing. Now we're going to sew all along this bottom fold line here to secure down our casing. But before you sew it, you need to place your webbing underneath the casing. So it needs to be oriented in this position right here, just the way you see it. You want the top edge of the webbing to be about 1/4 of an inch above that line that you drew. And you also want the edge of the webbing here to be set in about 1/8 of an inch away from the side edge of the casing. So I have that positioned. I'm just going to put a couple of long clips to hold it in place. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side. So once again, I'm going to take the opposite end of my webbing. I'm going to place it about 1/4 of an inch above that line that I drew. And I want to make sure that this is set in about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And once again, I'll hold it in place with a couple of longer clips. And now we can go ahead and sew straight across the bottom of the casing. I'm sewing on a Juki DX4000, which is also known as the Kokochi. And I will be using a stitch length of 3.0, and I'm only going to be top stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from that edge there. So I'll get it positioned in place. And you want to backstitch really well at the beginning and end of your casing. And once you're finished sewing the casing on that side, you can go ahead, flip everything around, and sew the casing in place on the opposite side. This is what the exterior of your project bag should look like right now. The wrong sides are facing each other. The casing is sewn in place, and the webbing is coming off the side of the bag at an angle. And this is what it looks like on the other side. Now I'm going to place it again so that the right sides are folded together. And this is what it should look like with the right sides together. And once again, your strap is off the edge here. We will be pushing the strap to the inside to sew the lining in place. So right now we're going to go ahead and work on the lining side. Now we can work on our lining. I have my 2 pieces of lining fabric here with the wrong sides facing up. I'm going to remove one, and I want to draw a couple of lines. So the first line that I'm going to do is going to be 1/2 inch from the bottom edge, and this is the 13-inch side that I'm marking from. So once again, I will line up my ruler and mark that line 1/2 inch up from the bottom, and that is going to be our seam line. Now your seam line only needs to be marked on one piece, and we're going to leave an opening in the bottom of the lining for turning the bag right side out. So I'm going to put some X's in this section right here, and I've left an opening that's about 6.5 inches long. The second line that we're going to mark is going to be 2 inches up from that bottom edge. So line up your ruler and draw your line across. And then I'm going to take my second piece of lining, and on the second piece I'm only going to mark the line that's 2 inches up from the bottom edge, and again you want to make sure that you're on that 13-inch side. So go ahead and mark 2 inches up from the bottom of your second piece of lining. Then you're going to take the 2 pieces and place them right sides together. And I'll put a few clips to hold them in place. And you're going to sew on that 1/2 inch line from the edge to the first mark, then you'll skip over to the second mark and then stitch out to the second edge. You want to back stitch at the beginning and end of each seam. And I am going to go ahead and do this off camera. I finished sewing the seam and I left my opening. Now I want to fold back on this line that I drew before, and I want to fold the linings together so that they're right sides together. So this is 1/2 of the lining right here. I'm going to fold right on that line so that the lining is right sides together. You want to make sure that your side edges are even. So just go ahead and fold right on that line, and then you're going to press a crease in it. Then you can turn it over, and here's the second line that I drew. So once again, I'll open this up and place the lining right sides together, making sure that my edges are even. I'm going to fold right on that line and press a crease. And now that I have those folds pressed in place, I'm going to go ahead and iron this seam open. So now you should have the 2 folds pressed into place. You want those folds to be even with each other along the bottom, and you want your top and your side edges to all be even with each other. Now we want to sew the lining and the exterior together, so I'm going to bring back my exterior, and I have it folded right sides together right now, but I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to take the lining and clip the right side of the lining to the right side of the exterior, right along the top edge. Make sure that your top and side edges are nice and even with each other when you do this. Then you'll go ahead and clip the opposite side in exactly the same way. Once you have the top edges of your lining and your exterior clipped together, you're going to sew straight across the top, 1/2 of an inch away from the edge. I'm sewing across the first top edge. I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.6 and the seam allowance is 1/2 of an inch, and I'm just using that line that I drew at the beginning of the video that was 1/2 inch down from the top edge. You do want to back stitch at both ends. Try and make sure that the top edge of your exterior and your lining are staying even with each other. And back stitch again. Then you can flip everything around and go ahead and sew along the opposite top edge in exactly the same way. After sewing the lining and the exterior along the top edge of the bag, next thing that you want to do is open up these side seams right here, those short little side seams. And you're going to open up all 4 of them and just finger press them down. And then we're going to take the lining. We want to put the lining sides together and we want to put the exterior sides together, just like this. And now we can start clipping along the edges. Let's start on this side. And these little seams that are right here on the exterior, you want to line them up on both sides. Make sure that they're nice and even with each other. And clip them together. And then you're going to clip all down the length of the exterior side. And you're going to stop clipping right where that fold is. That's the fold that we created 1.5 inches up from the bottom of the bag. So don't clip past that point. And then on this side, you want these seams, this seam and this seam right here, to be pointing down towards the bottom of the lining. And you want to line those seams up and make sure that they're nice and even with each other. So line them up and clip them together. And you're going to clip down the length of the lining. And on the lining, you want to stop clipping about 2 inches up from the bottom. Then you can go ahead and flip it over and start clipping the other side. Now, when you clip this side, you're going to have to make sure that the strap is tucked in. So once again, match up those side seams on the exterior. Make sure that they're nice and lined up together. And then start clipping down the exterior side. And again, you'll stop clipping right where that fold is on the bottom. Then on the lining side, you're going to match up these seams right here. You want those seams to be even with each other. So clip those together. And then clip down along the length of the lining. And once again, you're going to stop about 2 inches from the bottom of the lining. After you have your exterior and lining sides clipped together, we're going to sew the sides together with a 1/2 inch seam. But we're not going to be sewing to the end of each seam. So from the exterior side, you're going to start sewing above the fold You'll stitch all the way down, and when you get to the lining side, you want to stop your stitching about 4 inches up from the bottom. So I'm just going to make a mark 4 inches up from the bottom on each side, and that's where I'm going to stop my stitching. So basically we'll be sewing from the fold all the way up to the line that I just marked on each side. I'm going to start sewing down the side. I'm using a stitch length of 2.6 and I am above the fold, and I do want to back stitch. Seam allowance is 1/2 of an inch. Make sure that you don't sew over your handle. That's on the inside of the bag right now. And I'm going to stop right where I made that 4-inch mark and backstitch. Then you can flip everything over to the opposite side and stitch the opposite side in exactly the same way. I have both of the side seams sewn, and the bottom of the exterior is folded up. I'm going to turn the piece this way, and I want to bring my lining down towards the bottom of the exterior. I'm going to open up the bottom just like this, and you're going to see the 2 folds that we created earlier. We want to take the fold of the exterior, and it's going to rest or be sandwiched in between the 2 folds of the lining. Now when you do this, you're going to open up the fold of the exterior, and this folded edge right here should be laying right against the crease of the fold in the exterior. So bring them together and just line the fold of the lining up with the crease in the fold of the exterior. Then you can take the exterior and fold it over the lining, just like this. I'm going to put a clip in there just to hold it in place temporarily. And the same thing on this side. You want the fold of the lining to be sitting on the crease of the fold in the exterior. And then you'll fold the exterior over that fold in the lining. Then the top fold comes down over the exterior, just like this. We'll do the same thing on the other side. And you want the edge of the fold in the exterior to be even with the edge of the fold in the lining. I'm going to put a few clips in there just to make sure that those edges stay together. And then I'll put a couple of clips along the side seam. Now we're going to go back to the sewing machine, and where we stopped the stitching, we're going to finish this seam by stitching right around here all the way to the bottom with that same 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's going to hold your side edges together. I'm sewing with the same stitch length of 2.6, and I'm starting right towards the end of that seam on the lining. And I am going to backstitch. Seam allowance is still 1/2 of an inch. And now I'll just sew off to the bottom of the bag. And backstitch. Now I'm going to flip this over to the other side, and this time I'm going to sew from the bottom of the bag up towards that seam. Again, seam allowance is 1/2 of an inch. And again, I will backstitch. Now we are ready to turn the bag right side out, so I'll take out these remaining clips. And if you look inside here, you're going to see the opening for your lining. And you'll just start turning everything right side out. Pulling out the edges here. Now when you start turning it out, you want the lining to be over the exterior side. And the reason why is because we need to close up the bottom of the lining before we can turn it so the exterior side is facing out. So you'll want to go ahead and square off the bottom edges of the lining, so that it has that nice little triangle at the bottom. And now is when you're going to close up the opening down here. And you can do it either with some hand stitching or machine stitching. It's totally up to you. So I've sewed my bottom closed, and now I'm going to turn it so that the exterior side is out. And then I'll just get in there and smooth it all out. The last thing to do is to put in our drawstring. So I have my paracord here. It's 2 yards. I'm just going to cut it in half into 2 1-yard pieces. And then I'm going to use a zip tie to draw it through the casing. So I'll just put a little knot in one end. I'm not making a very tight knot. I'm going to put the zip tie through that knot. I'm going to start by putting it in one end and out the other. And then I'll flip it over and put the cord through the other side of the casing. And then I'm just going to knot the ends together. And I like to make a nice tight knot. Then I'll take the second piece of paracord, and this time we're going to go through this end first. And flip it over and go through the casing on the other side. And then I'll place a knot in the end. Then the last thing that I do is I trim down the ends, and then I go ahead and singe them to prevent anything from fraying. And now your bag is all finished and ready to use. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this little project, and I hope that you'll give it a try. I would like to thank everybody who has supported me by liking my videos and subscribing to my channel. And if you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as one. I'd also love to see you over in my Facebook group, which is Rosie and David Patterns. Thanks for watching.